Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, first on the agenda is the presentation by Potts and Associates from the legislative updates. Zach, Jim, are you on the phone?
Zach, are you on the phone?
Are they dialed up, Keith?
I'll send him a note. I might recommend just coming back to them if they join us.
Well, let's move.
All right, are you guys, sorry, I didn't hear you guys. This is Zach. Are you guys waiting for me?
Yep.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I came on about 9:01. I took a second longer here with the previous county. So thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me. I know we're scheduled, but wanted to thank you guys as well. Kind of going to go through a few things for you guys and stuff that's going on, and kind of a little bit more high level, kind of what the feeling is over in Olympia right now, and kind of some of the things that the legislators are dealing with that have changed a little bit of the direction here. So number one of the big things that's out there is the Blake decision, and that's talking about the Supreme Court, how they ruled that incarceration specifically and solely for possession of an illicit substance was unconstitutional, at least how the law was written. That particular decision has really overshadowed a lot of the judicial reform bills and conversations. And the reason behind that is what happened is, obviously, I mean, this decision was made, and then the state and the counties and the judicial system has been left to deal with this. And it's looking a lot like the state is going to be responsible for any of the costs of implementing this. So I think the legislators have kind of stepped back and said, well, hold on a second here. This is clearly a substantive change. This is a shift, kind of very similar to what a lot of this policy would be. And they're going, hold on. So the state's responsible, number one. Number two, this is kind of a nightmare because there's a whole bunch of people out there that this is applied to, and there's no really clear path or good way to implementing this particular policy change that has happened. So they're going, well, if we're going to make some of these other policy changes, maybe we need to think a little bit more about how we're going to do it rather than just the feel-good idea behind it. We've got to get into the real-world implementation. And that's kind of the feeling behind things, because a lot of the tone behind a lot of these conversations isn't so, they're not pounding your fist on the table, we have to do this. It's more, this might be a good idea to look at this. Let's see how we can do it. So that's one little aspect that's changed in Olympia in terms of how they're addressing a lot of those conversations. And that also bleeds over a little bit into the criminal justice reform. So if you're talking about defund the police or whatever it might be, the Blake decision is one little aspect that's making him think about that. But they're also, there's some conversations and looking at, what's happening in New York City right now, where they did a pretty broad sweeping defund the police. They took a lot of money out of the department and everything. And the police department said, well, we're going to do what we can with what we have. And they've seen a huge spike in violent crimes and assaults and everything in New York City. And the police are sitting there going, well, we can't do anything. We don't have money. So that's given a little bit of pause because there's empirical evidence. I mean, they can point to, a city that's done this and say, look what happened. So at least it's tempering the conversations here when you're talking about criminal justice reform and you're talking about the judicial reform bills that they've been putting out there. Now, I'm not saying they've stopped anything. I'm not saying that they've done anything here that's going to be impactful in a positive way for us, but at least it's brought some maybe reason to the conversation. The other kind of glaring thing out there that everybody's wondering about is, the gas tax, carbon stuff, cap and trade, things like that. What we're hearing in that respect right now is there's going to be something coming down the pipe here that may include all of those. It's kind of like a all-encompassing bill in that respect. And so we don't have any idea what all that would include. And to be entirely honest about it, I don't think that the actual powers that may be have any real feel of what that bill will look like or what that package would look like. It may very well be wrapped up in a funding package or a revenue package or something like that. Some of the things that they are doing right now, they're kind of coming at the carbon and, carbon change, climate change stuff a little bit sideways. They're maybe removing some tax incentives for petroleum-based products, things like that. So they're kind of whittling away at it in the meantime. One positive note for the carbon stuff, the gas tax, which I think we can safely assume that none of us really like right now. Nobody likes to go to the pump and see a very, very high number up there. When they bundle a lot of this stuff together, the more they put in, the harder it is to hold together because, you got to get that many more people on board to get the votes to get it out. They are running out of time. It could be necessary to implement the budget, and keeping in mind any bills that they deem necessary to implement the budget can be pulled at any time. But this Friday at close of business, if they haven't started hearing a bill in committee, it's out. Like that's the cutoff for the policy committees in the opposite houses this Friday. So they are running on a pretty short timeline. One of your fellow commissioners in another county did inform me that he's got a friend who's a trucker in California, and 2 days ago that trucker paid $8.98 a gallon for road diesel in California. So kind of give people an idea of where the carbon initiatives, where the gas taxes, that is a real world number that came from this week. So, just kind of give people an idea of what that could look like. And while the trucker's paying, $8.98 a gallon, people need to remember, specifically as you get down to your local level, when you go to a restaurant, that means that they're going to get a fuel surcharge on top of their food or their deliveries and things like that, which translates directly to how much you're going to pay for things. So it really does affect everybody. The other thing that, specifically kind of want to talk about with you guys, as we're speaking to bills that may impact your ability to budget and how that goes, we've got 1332 and 1410. Those are both dealing with deferring property taxes. They are moving forward. They're changing constantly. We don't know what they're going to look like. There is a lot of conversation in the background here, specifically around 1410. It's a much simpler bill than 1332 is, which basically just defers the homeowners from having to pay property taxes. If they can, you got to apply for it and you got to meet certain criteria and all that. That is Representative Voll's bill out of Spokane. As long as he is a representative or a senator or in public office at the state level, he is going to be pushing this issue. And so some of the conversation is, well, if we can get it into a decent format this year, maybe we go with it. The treasurers, we received a lot of feedback from the treasurers. There is a lot of concern about this, and the big concern for the county, again, and when we've talked about it with both of these bills, is as you defer your revenue, you still have payments, whether that's bonds or levies or bonds to pay. that come due before you would be able to collect your revenue. And so the big rub here is, okay, so is the state going to loan you money to do this if they're going to make this policy? Are they going to provide that interim cash, or what can you do to make your payments? And that's a pretty big question. I mean, obviously, as you talk about putting your budget together, if you're not entirely sure how much revenue you're going to collect, it becomes very, very difficult to be able to do that. Some of the other bills that we've talked about, the coroner's bill, that one is going to be an interesting deal going forward because there was an amendment hung on it that wasn't supposed to be hung on it, apparently. So what that kind of speaks to is that even our legislators are having a difficult time with actually not being present, not being face to face. Things are slipping through the cracks. So we're really hoping that a lot of these bills might die in concurrence. And there is a lot of conversation around that issue, saying this is the first of the biennium. We do have next session. We can come back and really address a lot of these issues. And that kind of conversation is starting to happen more and more because people are realizing that when we're not in person, it's really difficult when you've got one person on a Zoom meeting or on a phone call. It's not like in Olympia, if you have another person walk up who may be pertinent to the conversation, you just include them. You can't do that on Zoom or on a phone call. And so it really does limit the conversations around these issues, and it limits the ability to make decisions, or informed decisions anyway. So that's certainly some concern. The other one that we have talked about is 1152, which is the regional health districts. Still they're trying to mess around with your local board of health and including more people on the local board of health. This is a local control issue. And basically the big concern there is, if you start including too many people on the board of health, especially people in the medical industry, medical professionals, they are busy people and they can't show up all the time. And if you don't have a quorum, you can't have a meeting. The other aspect of this that we can consider is, you as commissioners and any board that you guys put in place or that the county has, the goal isn't to have board members that know everything. I mean, you as commissioners don't know everything about every aspect of your county. But the point is, you guys can pull together the knowledge and sources, and you can get references and advisors and whatever you need to make an informed decision that's best for your constituents. And that's the argument, here against what 1152 would do to us, is they're requiring and telling you how you have to put this board together, when in all reality, it's really not necessary, because you can make the same informed decision by referencing these individuals from the community and not requiring that they come sit on a board, which they probably don't have time to do, especially in the middle of a pandemic right now. So the other interesting little bill that's out there is 5040, and that's reappropriating some of the waste, highway waste cleanup funds. Basically, it directs the Department of Ecology to tell the Department of Transportation, how they have to clean things up, and gives them the money that normally you would use to clean up your own garbage. And so it takes the money away from the county, gives it to Department of Transportation, which has a fantastic track record of wasting money. I'm going to be totally honest about that, where you guys can actually put it to work. So that's an interesting one. The 988 bill, which is House Bill 1477, 988 is the mental health emergency line. This bill has gone from a full-fledged implementation of every aspect of 988, from having the call center to the phone line to the people to source them to the, I think they're calling them strike teams, people that can go out and do an intervention or whatever. It's looking like it's going to be a lot more of studying the issue, putting, some call centers or call lines in place. The thing that's really going to get in the way of this bill, there's a couple things. Number one, there's education. Very few of our citizens out there even know that there could be or might be or is a 988 number for a mental health emergency. Then number two, the big concern that comes in here, and you could use the example of, say there's an individual who is standing on the edge of a bridge threatening to jump off. Clearly a mental health issue. do you have someone call 988 or do you call 911? Because if you call 988, that particular number is specified. It has to be separate from any of your dispatch, 911 dispatch. It has to be separate from all of your emergency services. So in an emergency situation, while it may be a mental health issue, is it prudent to call a 988 number, or do you call directly to emergency services so you can get, fire, medical, police, whatever actual support you need there in case somebody does get hurt? So that's a lot of the questions that they're talking about. And no matter what they do with the 988 bill, and that's 1477, no matter what they do with that, they will have to come back next year and tweak it. At least a little bit, maybe a substantial adjustment to that bill. The federal mandate on this particular line is not mandated until the middle of 2022, so June, July 2022. So we do have some time as a state to be able to comply with that particular application in that bill. So it does give us a little bit of time to adjust. So that's kind of the rundown. There is one other little piece of information that you will find interesting. Up until about the beginning of this week, Speaker Jenkins has said adamantly that at the end of the 105 days, the regular session, which ends April 25th, we are going to be done. We're not going to do a special session this year. It's too difficult. There's too much going on. Well, now we're hearing a little gossip in the background, and it sounds like the legislators are trying to talk themselves into a special session now because we're getting federal funding coming in, and they just can't figure out how they're going to spend these federal dollars. The concern with that, with federal money, there's always strings attached. They say you got to spend it here, you got to spend it there, have to spend it by a certain date or you lose it. Certainly we don't want to lose the money. But those stipulations that come down with the federal funding can cause all kinds of problems. And really what we don't want to see, especially from the local level, is the implementation of, say, a new policy or a new program that has a finite amount of funding. However, while it's an ongoing program. So that's the last little piece of information I have for you guys in terms of the overall feel around Olympia. Are there any specifics that you guys have questions about, or anything you'd like to know, or anything you've seen that's super concerning?
Commissioners, questions?
Pack, this is Commissioner Pack. One of the subtleties of the Wasalfo Public Health Bill, 1152, is the notion that when you set up a local board of health with local health officials, if you're not careful, you find yourself in a situation where you've got appointed individuals out of the local community making decisions on expenditure of public funds, and those individuals have never been elected by the citizens to represent them in taxation. And so that was one of the debates, and one of the quasi solutions, if you will, was separating out those boards so that on budget matters, personnel matters, things that require representation, that there would still likely be boards of health comprised of county commissioners, and then they would be augmented by an advisory board. So I want to give that background and asked if you have heard anything definitive on how they plan to structure that. Last I heard was on Friday, and it was still kind of up in the air. Any decisions on how they want to do that, if it's all one board or if they want to have a health board augmented by local expertise board?
Well, at this point, they're still kind of at a standstill trying to figure out what to do in that respect. And that is a very, very good point, because, as soon as, if they implement this as all one board, now there are legitimate grounds for unconstitutionality. And, who knows, that may be the best thing for us. But they could just strike down that small piece. So no, they haven't made any decisions on that. They're kind of at a stalemate, standstill. They may wait till the last minute to do that. So, one other thing I was gonna mention to you guys, and it's a note of appreciation from our legislators. They have noticed the involvement of the community, and so you know, you guys sharing information and getting the word out to your constituents is making a difference. It's not going unnoticed, and it is. I'm hearing that it's very much appreciated. So they are very glad to see the rural communities engaging with the legislature. So thank you very much for that as well.
Well, just sharing what you were giving us. So thank you for that information. I have a question. I heard on the radio that the farm and dairy overtime for the is exempt now. Is that, did I hear that correctly? For wages? Overtime.
So the overtime lawsuit is still kind of in turmoil. I think that's where it's headed. Yes. There's a lot of small idiosyncrasies to that to see how that could apply. And this is a fight that's not just happening in Washington State. It's happening all over the U.S. So there's still a lot of news to be, you know, released on that, and a lot of decisions to be made. But yeah, that's where we're headed.
I heard it on the radio, and so it hasn't been decided yet.
So yes, it kind of has, but there's a whole bunch of stipulations and limitations on it. You know, whether it be size or number of employees, or, you know, is it a family farm, is it a corporate farm? There's a lot of information that isn't included in that, and you got to really drill down into what the ruling says and what the decisions say to be able to find out if that applies to you.
Okay.
So the answer is yes and no.
Okay.
Of course, it's government.
So on the farm workers, are they trying to make that retroactive?
Yes, they were.
The one thing that they said is it is not going to be retroactive. Well, that was the last news that I heard, is that the positive is that it won't be retroactive. So,
Any other questions?
That's definitely a benefit. You know, and as we all know, I mean, you guys are from representing a lot of agricultural area, you know, and it's hard. We see this is a great example of what we've been talking about in the past, just all together here. You know, we're having policies put forth by people who've never lived in a rural community, never lived on a farm, some of them never set foot outside of a city. And so this is the kind of policy stuff you see. I mean, yeah, when you work on a farm, you work your butt off for part of the year, and then you have to play the rest of the year. Or, you know, or you work really hard for a certain amount of time, and then it's a very slow pace. You know, I mean, things will get done. You got all winter to just fix a tractor or something, whatever it might be. So there's a misunderstanding in that educational component to this. Well, you know, nobody's anti-worker. You start having to pay overtime to your workers for, say, harvest. It becomes extremely expensive. And so I think it will be an ongoing conversation. Like we said, at least it's not retroactive. So looking forward, there's going to be, I would expect a lot of changes, you know, and possibly more exemptions and things like that.
Okay, is there any other questions? Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you, gentlemen, as well. And call or email anytime if you see anything that really stands out. The schedule for this week was pretty anemic from Wednesday afternoon on. So as bills come up, if they come up, I will certainly be sure to alert you of those. We really don't know what to expect, so we're just watching diligently, and we'll be in touch.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, with that, we will go to the presentation and background and introduction of the urban growth areas and limited access of more intensive rural development by Nicole. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. So I see it here. Karen, I don't see it up on the screen.
I don't have it. Do you want me to do it?
I have the presentation here. I don't see it on the screen. Is there a way I can make it broadcast?
Yes.
How do I make it display up there? Is there something I should do?
Because it should automatically be.
Right, that's 3, function 3.
This is what connected to that, right?
F3? It's not doing anything.
Hey, Mark, I'm trying to get, she has on her laptop the display. It's showing on the laptop, but it's not showing on the screen.
It's
What
not
button?
connecting.
Yes. Which button? On her laptop or the OSD one? Yeah, the little one? I pushed it. I pushed it. Yep, and then I turned it off and it didn't do it either.
It's going to black on my screen, but it's not showing anything up there.
It is going, it's doing something?
Yeah.
Okay, so there.
There, thank you.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So the purpose of this morning's presentation, Commissioners, is to give you an overview on a couple of different matters related to the comprehensive plan update, which is underway in Franklin County. And while this is still at the Planning Commission level, and they have not yet forwarded a recommendation to you, that will be happening in the near term here. And so we want to just prepare you with some background information. So to begin, I'm going to serve you a healthy dose of alphabet soup this morning. I'm going to go over some terms and acronyms just because I use them so frequently. I need to sometimes slow down myself and explain what each one is. So GMA refers to the Growth Management Act. Of course, that's what is compelling us to do many of the things we're doing in accordance with the comprehensive plan update. Washington State is one of the few states in the U.S. that's a growth management state, and the Growth Management Act began this process back in the early 90s. UGA stands for Urban Growth Area, and that is the area that contains a city as well as all of the area around it that has been deemed as appropriate to be annexed. So those are the areas that it's supposed to grow into in a 20-year period, including that area which is already incorporated. A LAMIRD is not my favorite acronym, but it stands for Local Area of More Intensive Rural Development. And this is a term in the Growth Management Act, and this is something that we see in county comprehensive plans, never in city comprehensive plans, because they are about rural areas and concentrated, distinct rural areas, and I'll go into some more detail on that. A CFP is a capital facilities plan, and that's an important component of a comprehensive plan. And finally, CWPPs is the acronym we use for the countywide planning policies. So these are the locally adopted policies which are guided by state law, but they talk about local administration related to the Growth Management Act. Okay, as I mentioned, the Growth Management Act was adopted by the legislature in 1990. And according to what we find in the RCWs, that was done in response to concerns that uncoordinated and unplanned growth, together with the lack of common goals expressing the public's interest in the conservation and wise use of our lands, posed a threat to the environment, to sustainable economic development, and to the health, safety, and high quality of life enjoyed by the residents of this state. The Growth Management Act is very clear about where urban growth should occur. The GMA says that first, areas that are already characterized by urban growth and which have adequate existing public facilities and service capacities to search such development, those should be prioritized. And so when Growth Management Act began, of course, anything that was already established within a city, that remained because that was already characterized by urban growth. Secondly, urban growth should occur in areas that are characterized by urban growth that will be served adequately by a combination of both existing public facilities and any additional needed public facilities that are provided by either public or private sources. So that's the secondary component. And then third, in the remaining portions of urban growth areas. So those are areas that are so designated for future growth. And this is all from RCW 36.70A. So to go into a little more depth about urban growth areas, and again, this is going to be a very general overview. The Growth Management Act prescribes that each county shall designate the UGAs. So automatically anything, as I mentioned, that's a city already, that's already a set thing. When we set those UGAs, when the counties do that action, what's expected is that any growth of an urban nature will be concentrated within those areas, and anything that lies outside of those urban growth areas would have growth that is not of an urban nature. And so there's a lot of case law surrounded all this, a lot of things that have gone to the growth management hearing boards all over the past years, but these are the basic principles. I know it's a little unclear, but it's open to interpretation as it has been by the growth management hearings boards. UGAs, as I've said a couple different times, they always encompass cities. This also means that a city that has cutouts in it, sometimes called donut holes, those are automatically in urban growth areas. So whether or not the folks that live in those areas want to be in the city, they are certainly in the urban growth area. That is just automatic. And an important thing to always remember about urban growth areas is that they have to be carefully sized. The size of them is based on growth management population projections. You have to do and show your homework in order to size an urban growth area. And the idea is that an urban growth area should be that which is required for 20 years of growth of the population. That doesn't mean just area for houses, by the way, but that also means the schools, open space, green spaces, all the public facilities that would support it, commercial and industrial development. That whole host of things that have to do with a thriving population, those are all considered when we look at sizing these urban growth areas. Again, the counties are responsible for designating, expanding, and reducing UGA boundaries, although they are required to consult with the cities in their determinations. Obviously, the cities want to have they have a lot to say about urban growth areas. They're the ones, after all, who are providing services. But the way that it's set up in Washington State, it is the county that has the ultimate say if an urban growth area is expanded or changed. A rule to always remember, cities can simply not annex areas that are outside of their UGAs. And in metropolitan areas of the state where there's maybe, many different cities, Puget Sound area, sometimes you get into struggles. Well, whose UGA is this? It's designated by King County, let's say. So is it going to be annexed by city A or city B? There's a lot of sometimes confusion there. We don't have that problem here. Our cities are spaced out such that their UGAs do not match each other and are not confused for one another. But certainly that can be an issue in other parts of the state.
Excuse me, Nicole, you mentioned the counties have essentially final say. Would you just speak briefly to the Growth Management Hearings Board because they think they do?
So the Growth Management Hearings Board will hear objections to actions taken by counties. And this has happened in our area. This has happened in Benton County a number of times. So what has happened is we've seen that a county would say approve an urban growth area expansion. Maybe it was requested by a city. They went ahead and they took legislative action. They passed an ordinance. Well, that is subject to an appeal period. And during that appeal period, any party that has standing can issue an appeal. At that point, it would go, in our case, to the Eastern Washington Growth Management Hearings Board. They would review the case. They would look at the decision that was made by the county and compare it to what we find in, as I mentioned, case law, roughly using that, what are previous decisions of that Growth Management Hearings Board. And they would also compare it to, what is in the state law, state statutes. And so they might look at things such as proper noticing, kind of administrative issues. They're going to take a good close look at that because, of course, any of that, if there's problems that arise from that, that's all ripe for appeal. But also the decision itself. Were findings established? Was this made based on decisions related to growth and expansion? Was the homework done? Was the homework used in terms of coming up with these calculations and these decisions? They're going to look very closely in those cases at why something was done. And sometimes it can be really tough. And there have been many times that we've seen where a Growth Management Hearings Board will remand back to the county to do it again. Change your decision. They might issue a final decision order to change it back or to go back and reprocess. It can get quite messy. So we try to avoid that, of course.
And in some cases, they will look and determine that there's already sufficient land for intended expansion within the existing UGA, and therefore going outside of it violates the basic premise of the Growth Management Act. And such was the case in Benton County with an industrial park south of the interstate. I think it was 300 acres. It got remanded back and the county reversed course.
Yes, that's correct. That also happened in the case of a West Richland proposed expansion years before that. Same idea. They were going for an industrial expansion. They wanted to go out to where they had a proposed freeway access, and that was remanded back. The Growth Management Hearings Board said in that case, the city was already tremendously oversized. They had basically no business asking for a UGA expansion.
And for folks listening, the Growth Management Hearings Board is a board that is appointed by the governor. It's about 50% attorneys and about 50% elected officials. And we have a couple from Eastern Washington, a couple from Western, and I'm not sure where all the boundaries are, but that's where their authority comes from, the governor's office and statute.
That is correct.
So that was my question. The Eastern Washington Growth Management Board has got Western Washington people on it?
I don't know the membership and their representation, but there is separate boards for Eastern and Western Washington.
My question is Eastern Washington all Eastern Washington residents?
So the representatives for the Eastern Washington portion of the Washington State Growth Management Hearings Board is an attorney out of Yakima and a former state representative out of Cle Elum. And as I understand it, they assign review of pending matters by region, but the decisions are at the state full Growth Management Hearings Board level.
It is quite a complicated process, but a lot of information can be gleaned by going to their website. They even have a whole digest of decisions, so you can go back and see all the decisions made throughout the year for various.
How many members are on the Eastern Washington?
When the board comes to a community, there would be 3 people who would be in charge of the hearing.
Okay.
And I believe those are the names, those members' names are the ones that would be on the final decision and order if it's done. There's also a lot of work that's done and encouraged by the state to try to settle these decisions. So depending on who the appellant is, to try to work something out, negotiate. I believe the last round over in Benton County, there was an extended negotiation that ensued, and then it was pretty much considered a settlement decision at the end rather than a final decision and order by the hearings board.
So looking at this, and these were appointed by the governor.
Correct.
Again, we have a government that looks like it's from the top down instead of the bottom up, where we are losing control of our own growth here in the county by an agency or a board that's put together by a governor.
What I can say is that when you might hear from state officials or other folks talking about, or people, proponents of it, who might talk about the Growth Management Act, they would tell you that it is a framework and that local decisions are local decisions. And they would say that there is a framework for those local decisions to be made, for example, passing the countywide planning policies. But of course, we know that there are things that you can do right and wrong exactly within that that act. And so,
Okay.
yes,
Thank you.
certainly. I'm going to go to the next slide here. So when we go back to the Growth Management Act and we ask proponents, why do you have urban growth areas? This is what they would explain. And a lot of these, I think, are very good reasons to have something in place. Implementation, I'll leave to your own decision, but why do we have UGAs? It's to protect rural character. It's to reduce conflicts with farming. It can serve to foster regional coordination between the counties and the cities. So basically put factors in place that help that communication and that coordination occur. It's, of course, to accommodate growth. As I spoke to you last time, Franklin County is experiencing rapid growth. Washington State is experiencing rapid growth. We need to figure out how to accommodate that. UGAs help to direct where facilities and investments should be located during the 20-year planning period. This is really important because a city may have a new council who's very passionate about a certain area of town and they want to give them lots of attention and spend a lot of money. Well, does that line up with what the community has decided in terms of where these types of investments should go? It's a question of how do we spend our resources? How do we invest in our communities, making sure that important decisions relate to an agreed upon kind of method of moving forward and policies and decisions. UGAs protect natural resource areas. They also protect environmentally sensitive areas. The Growth Management Act does mandate that critical areas, which is our term for those environmentally sensitive areas, are protected or development is mitigated to lessen impacts, things like that. And finally, prevent sprawl. In terms of sizing, I've touched on this a bit, but just to reiterate, areas and densities which permit urban growth projected to occur in the next 20-year period is the standard. You have to assess what's available for realistic development through an inventory. So I described sort of the whole host of things that are needed to support a community. It's not just houses, it's the schools, it's the churches, it's everything that makes the community a community, plus job opportunities. Commercial and industrial development is paramount. We don't want to overlook that ever. When we look at the inventory, though, we have to consider things like market and economic factors, and we are permitted to do so. Obviously, not all developable land will develop, right? There's always someone who has a large tract of land and they're in the middle of a place that maybe a lot of people can imagine condominiums or different types of things. Well, if he doesn't want to sell, he doesn't want to sell. We have to realize that, the market conditions need to be considered and no one is forced into something when they're a landowner. So we have to consider those market and economic factors. We also look at what is already entitled. So when we're looking, say, at a city and how big is their UGA and what they've already done inside their existing incorporation boundaries, we need to look at what zoning and density would allow, and also what preliminary plats have already been approved, because that tells us what development is already allowed and they just need to pull a permit for it, basically. We have to consider infrastructure aspects and availability of facilities. There are certain areas where you just can't make sewer work very well. There might be topographic reasons or other limitations, so we have to be mindful of all of those types of things. Areas where maybe transportation is not easily provided, things like that. And then, as I mentioned before, consider critical areas. So if we're expanding into an area and it's just full of floodplain and wetlands, that might not be the first place to look for urban growth, right? So we need to consider all of those types of things, and certainly steep slopes factors in. We look at different areas in the state where the landslides have occurred, for example. Those are not prime development areas. We need to make sure that we're directing development to the right places in respect to where the environmental factors.
Nicole, I just want to add a note. On the first one, market and economic factors, sometimes people will forget that as you go through the process of looking at your 20-year projected growth curve, you can't simply go out and pick an area that you think is going to accommodate growth for 20 years. There may be large farm holdings and circles in there that choose not to develop and want to continue to farm, and certainly that's their right to do so. And that's part of why it's so important that in this process we go out and we speak to local landowners and try and get whatever input they're willing to provide in terms of their desire to maybe have their lands developed or their intent to continue farming for the long term. It's not binding on them, but it certainly helps a municipality or a county in estimating how much land out of a proposed UGA would actually be available for development. So that's something I think gets overlooked. I just wanted to share it. And we've gone through that process of talking to landowners to see what their preferences are.
Yeah, most certainly, Commissioner. I would also add, in many of those cases, you might even consider where is irrigation water available.
Right.
Because the U.S. government has already provided this resource, and it's a major investment. It should all be considered. A final thing before I move on to the next slide about urban growth areas, they may not encroach on resource lands, and I'll get into that in a little more detail in a moment, but there have been lands established in Franklin County, as I've discussed before, that have been identified as agricultural lands of long-term significance. These can be dry land farming areas or places where they are irrigated and they might have prime soil for farmland. And so those areas that have already been designated by the county, we can't move the urban growth areas out into those same areas. Just real quick, a couple things to quote from the RCWs. Urban growth refers to growth that makes intensive use of land. It's incompatible with the primary use of land for food, other agricultural products, or fiber, the extraction of mineral resources, rural uses, rural development, and natural resource lands. So basically, this is drawing a line between what's urban and what isn't urban or suitable for urban growth. And then we also see a pattern of more intensive rural development is not urban growth. This means like little rural enclaves, crossroad centers, things like that. That's rural development. It is not considered urban. When allowed to spread over wide areas, urban growth typically requires urban governmental services. So characterized by urban growth, that term refers to land having an urban growth located on it, or to land located in relationship to an area with urban growth on it as to be appropriate for urban growth. Kind of sounds like it's a circle, but bear with me here. And urban growth areas means those areas designated by a county pursuant to RCW 3670A.110. So basically, once we create those urban growth areas, those are the areas where those investments such as sewer can be made, right? And then anything outside of it is to be protected, and you do not extend sewer to it because you're trying to control where you have the urban growth and where you have everything else, either rural, agricultural, and those resource lands that I described. This is a look at the map from the current comprehensive plan. So the one that was adopted in 2008, the one we're looking to update now. I just wanted to show very quickly that this map does show those urban growth areas that were designated at that time and where they are with respect to the incorporated cities. So you'll see that where there's a line, and again, this is from the comprehensive plan, where there's a line for an urban growth area, and then the city maybe hasn't, the incorporated limits are smaller, that area in between is white. And that's important to note on Franklin County maps because in some parts of the state, counties will designate the future land use inside those urban growth areas. But in the case of Franklin County and Benton County, we've deferred to the cities to do that. So the cities, you'd have to go to their comprehensive plan land use map to see what the designations are for those lands that are still not incorporated in the city, but they're in their UGAs. They've decided how those should develop.
And Nicole, just a quick note on that. Isn't there a statutory obligation that says shall, the cities and the counties shall engage in compatible or consistent development standards within the UGA?
There is, and that brings up another point. I'm saying that the cities designate the land use on their comprehensive plan maps, but it's important to realize that it's still the county that's permitting any projects on those lands until and unless they're incorporated. So that means that the zoning is assigned by the county to comply with the city's comprehensive plan, and the county is responsible for reviewing short plats, long plats, any development activity that occurs inside the urban growth areas, but which are outside of the incorporation limits. So coordination has to be done because
Well,
of the scenario.
And the classic example, excuse me, is the donut hole, where the county will have a street of a certain width that'll abut a city street outside the donut hole that is much wider. And the question is, does the county have an obligation to develop to the city standards, or does the city have an obligation to develop or not develop? I guess they wouldn't develop in the donut hole, but the point is that in those UGA areas, donut holes and the periphery that you see in white, I think we have a statutory requirement, not even a choice. I think it says shall develop, and I forget what the term is, but basically equal, same, similar development standards as the city. That's been a challenge for City of Pasco and Franklin County for many, many years. And I think it's an issue that's going to get brought up this time. And that's why I'm raising it now, just for awareness.
Yes, and to further your point a little more, Mr. Peck, there's been adopted by this board a set of countywide planning policies via resolution, and it speaks directly to those types of issues. All right, this map here is those designated agricultural resource lands that I spoke about before. So just so that you are aware of the past on this, there were 3 different types of lands designated as agricultural resource lands by the county. There's also a different map that shows the mineral resource lands. And the other category that could have been designated was forest lands, but we don't have any designated forest lands in Franklin County. So to speak specifically to the ag resource lands, there's 3 types. The circles, mostly circles that you'll see, which are green, are those areas that are irrigated and they have Quincy fields, the Quincy soil type. And that's just a specialized soil that's available locally. And so they gave that a special designation. Everything that you see in red on this map is a prime irrigated land. So it is irrigated, but doesn't necessarily or does not have those Quincy soils. And so it's just given that general designation. And then the smattering further east in the county that's in brown, those are the prime dry lands. So I know a little less about those, but those were established to be those areas for grazing and other types of activities. My understanding is that this was developed, many years ago by the county. As I said, it is incorporated in the current comprehensive plan, and I believe the Franklin Conservation District helped to establish this. One thing I've noticed is that in the case of the agricultural lands that are around the current UGA line for the city of Pasco, it's about a mile buffer. Even if there was something that was irrigated and may have had Quincy soil, if it was within a mile buffer of the Pasco line, they didn't include it at that time. So that's what we have. That's what we're starting with.
Nicole, about maybe a year and a half ago, Commissioner Didier made an interesting observation about these soil designations and how over decades of farming, irrigation practices have improved, and lands that previously were in a particular category by virtue of the way they had to be irrigated today can be irrigated differently, and that's changed which ones are actually prime of a particular type. And so the question is, in the updating of our comp plan, will we necessarily be going back and reevaluating how those are designated?
We will not be reevaluating. However, we've proposed language about how those could be reevaluated moving forward. Currently in the existing comprehensive plan, there's no discussion of how to de-designate
So it would give us a tool to make those changes.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
That's a great observation on Commissioner Didier's part, and also on your part to include that tool in the plan, because like you say, it hasn't been there in the past.
Right. And I mean, there was a good rationale, I'm sure, put forth at the time to put this map together, but information changes, practices change. So we needed to have some criteria and a process put forth to be able to do that evaluation moving forward. I thought that was very important. In terms of other things, I'm just displaying this for you, but if you wanted to do further reading about planning and urban growth areas, these are the areas to look at. Just citing Washington Administrative Code here. So Washington Administrative Code's in chapter 365-196 has a number of sections that span from urban services, costs of urban services, tools for managing UGAs, use of population projections, and so forth. So we've tried to, we've endeavored to really make sure that we're consistent with all of these so we can bring to you a defensible and very well-researched proposal in terms of the plan moving forward. One thing I did want to not forget to talk about a little bit is land capacity and buildable lands. In the Puget Sound area and in some other areas of the state, including Clark County, where Vancouver is, they're required to do a buildable lands monitoring plan. So they have to look and they look back and they look forward at what they have entitled and what's been built versus what they expected. And they have to be monitoring that all the time. We don't have to do that, at least not yet in Franklin County. But what it does is it provides a really in-depth look at how buildable lands are done over time. It requires a lot of coordination with the builders, obviously, and the development community to figure this all out. And they use models. It gets very complicated. What's important as a takeaway from that, though, is there are certain methods that have been used to establish how land capacity analysis should be performed. And that information needs to be used, especially for the larger cities. It needs to be looked at appropriately and by these kind of standards. They don't have to use a model. They don't have to go into the extent that the state mandates these certain communities, these 7 counties that are included in their Buildable Lands program, but certainly looking at like a market factor, some of those things that I've called out is important so that they can say what they already have available in inventory and available as entitled lands for development within the 20-year period. You have to look in before you look out is the basic idea about urban growth. Okay, and we talked about countywide planning policies. I just wanted to remind you that you've adopted policies to implement the RCW relating to establishment of urban growth areas. You've adopted policies for promoting contiguous and orderly development and the provision of urban services to such development. So that's been spelled out. This is just a clip of some of the countywide planning policies, but certainly this is something we're going to be talking about. And then real quick, I just have, I think 1 or 2 more slides. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about these limited areas of more intensive rural development, LAMIRDs. So going back to our map again, you can see, it's a little hard on the screen, but you can see little enclaves where we don't have the agricultural green designation, but instead we have different LAMIRDs out there. They're called rural remote, agricultural service center, rural residential, rural settlement, rural shoreline development, rural activity center, or rural industrial. So for example, the gray area kind of chunk along 395 north of Pasco, that is rural industrial land. Further west towards the river, hugging the river, we have a blue area, and that's the rural shoreline development area. These are areas that with the advent of growth management, the county did an inventory and found these areas, these small settlement towns or crossroads, places like Eltopia, Basin City, where we've seen that already development has occurred. So they looked at it, they established a border, they called it a logical outer boundary, and they said, this has already become rural development. This is not just for agricultural purposes. We're gonna recognize this as a rural area, but those can't be expanded. So it's important to note those. UGAs can be expanded, but these rural areas can't. They're supposed to be really set in time.
Before you go off of that, on the shoreline development,
Yes.
furthest north, there's a color inside the blue. What does that designate? Is that a slough area?
I think, all right, I don't know how far up you're looking, but so there's also coloring for the river.
Where it's actually larger than a line. I
Mhm.
mean, it's right up there, just a little bit further north than Eltopia and Merrill's Corner. It's
I
just
gotcha.
due west.
Yeah, I see that. So that is, I believe that is actually not designated rural shoreline development. That's just where my map overlaps the river, river boundary and the county line. So the actual extent of the rural shoreline development that we see north of Pasco, it only goes up as far as Sagemore.
Gotcha.
Did I miss something?
No, and we would need to double check. That could be a land or like a rural remote.
No,
It's not. Okay, then it's probably just an island.
it's a blip on my map.
Okay.
All of this information is available on our project website, so I wanted just to make that clear to the audience. I don't know if these slides have been shown as I've been speaking on a broadcast out to the public on YouTube, but we have provided slides, and I will make sure that they go on this website, but they've also been included, thank you, on the county's agenda items for today, so anyone can view these slides, of course, and can zoom in and look at these maps and everything else. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present on this to you this morning, and we're looking forward to very soon, I hope, bringing to you the recommendation of the Planning Commission with regards to this important update project.
Okay. Any other questions, commissioners?
Super complex topic. Thank you for summarizing it.
Yeah, and there's a guidebook if you want to look at it too, so I can provide that link.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask just one question?
Absolutely.
Nicole or Derek, either one, could you just make sure that the board is aware of any ethical restrictions regarding discussion of potential urban growth boundary changes? I know the city of Pasco has kind of already been through this process, and there's an extensive public comment period, but not everybody's aware of the limitations, and I suspect that they may be interested in talking to a commissioner before they've had a chance to discuss this. So would you
Sure.
provide us your response to that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Johnson. And I have good news in that regard. So this is not a quasi-judicial matter. So that means that it is not subject to disclosure of ex parte communications or anything like that. This is legislative in nature. And so you are free to have discussions with your constituents or anyone who wants to chat about the urban growth areas. I've prevented going into detail with deference because it hasn't been out of the Planning Commission yet. It's still, their topic to examine and to provide you with a recommendation. But nonetheless, you don't need to cover your ears if you hear someone talking about their UGA expansion or anything like that. It's free to talk about because it is a legislative item and this is an important policy matter that you'll have to make a decision on.
All right.
Which is different from the matter of having real or implied conflicts of interest over where a UGA boundary may go. If, for example, you're a commissioner and you own some of these lands subject to or had close connections, then a person would want to investigate those carefully before we went in the process, and our civil counsel could give them guidance.
Most certainly, and we'll encourage when we get to the point of you guys having your own public hearings on the matter, making sure there's an opportunity to disclose interests and things like that, just so it's put out on the record and everything. But a reminder, this is not the same as a conditional use permit or rezoning, things like that, where you have a closed record coming to you. This is all essentially open record.
Okay. Thank you. All righty. Good presentation.
Thank you.
So with that, Keith, we're down to public comment. Is there anybody on the phone?
No, sir.
And is there anybody in the meeting room that'd like to comment?
Good morning. Thank you, Commissioner Peck, for sharing that we need to figure out how to work in the donut holes in that area. You guys know I've been beating that drum for multiple years now, and I think the time has come to make that happen, and this is a good opportunity to the city and the county to get together and come up with a set of rural development standards that you can both live with. Not saying that I don't care, but there needs to be something that I can go on. You know, I may or may not have an input, but so far we can't get the city and the county to work together towards that. And I think that that certainly needs to be a part of this process, so that as developers, you know, the public position of both the city and the county is to develop the donut holes. And as a developer, have tried diligently to do that, and feel like that I'm failing in a spectacular level of not being able to get the county and the city to come together and in fact come up with a set of standards that they both can agree on. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Commissioner Peck, and would certainly encourage you other two to work hard to get that to happen.
As a segue to Mr. Potts's comments reference to the Blake decision, if maybe I could put that into a more simpler context for you, is that our state Supreme Court ruled that it's unconstitutional for police officers to arrest people with dope in their pockets, is what it comes down to. And we are currently getting rid of warrants, releasing people out of jail and out of custody over this. Communities are a little bit in strife. We believe that there's probably a workaway around it, and it's this right here that I'm about to ask you to consider. And that is to consider creating a gross misdemeanor ordinance for possession of controlled substances. Your counties or surrounding counties are beginning to do that, and a lot of the city entities are. It's my understanding that some of the prosecutors in the state are leery of doing that or hesitant to do that. But it's in the best interest of public safety, and it's also a needed thing for the police officers out there as they encounter these people on a daily basis that have hardcore narcotic substances in their pockets over some strange ruling that's basically put the whole thing upside down. As a community, I am not in favor of legalizing hardcore substances, and I think that we should do everything within our powers to create laws in order to fend that off. And so that's simply done by an ordinance. The prosecutor can present that ordinance for your consideration and then act the ordinance. So I'd ask you if you'd take some time to think about that and look at it.
Keith, I've heard on the radio, Grant County has already passed this ordinance, and maybe look to them and see how that's going. And
I know several counties are looking at that possibility. Sheriff, maybe if I just might ask a couple questions. Does that mean that if the narcotics are located, for example, in their vehicle but not on their person, is that a different question? Are they still subject to arrest, or does that mean if
all they simply have to do is go, I don't know how that got there.
And there's no minimum quantity to have a presumption that they're intending to distribute?
If it's more than user amounts, then it becomes possession with intent to deliver, which is a whole different law and statute. This is, the guy that is carrying a gram or 2 grams of heroin in their pocket with a needle, or those type of things. That commonly law enforcement officers arrest people for what's called just simple possession, which most people don't go to prison for in the first place. But it is just literally tied the law enforcement's hands with that. And of course, that reverberates down to public safety issues when you go off the rails and decide that it's a good thing to legalize hardcore substances through some sort of a court decision. And there is workarounds, and we can always go back once it straightens this to make it a felony again. But the best fix for right now is the gross misdemeanor ordinance, so that the cops have the ability to deal with those type of individuals out in the field. And like I say, it's not an uncommon thing. It's a daily thing, actually.
So
people getting arrested. So
if I could, quick question and an observation. Question is, have you had an opportunity yet to speak with our prosecutor? I'm not looking for what you discussed or what you decided, but have you had the chance to make that contact?
I have.
Okay.
And I've also made contacts with the chief of police of Pasco, and other people who say that we need to push this and we need to come up with some sort of ordinance.
And the observation I'd make is that the state Supreme Court referred to this in their ruling as a case of first impression language, meaning that it has essentially retroactivity because it hasn't been before the Supreme Court previously. And that has the State Association of Counties and many others gravely concerned about the potential costs of looking backward however many years, potential sentences that were longer than the Supreme Court thinks they should have been, the potential litigation surrounding incarceration, on and on and on and on. What you're talking about with an ordinance would be prospective, looking forward only. It wouldn't address that retroactivity.
No.
I know you know that. I just wanted to put that out there for the public to know that. Thanks.
Yes.
Question,
Yes, sir.
Sheriff, is if you were to pull somebody over and they had that minute amount of substance on them, would that still entail you to search their car?
No, because what would happen is you're going to lose what's basically is a probable cause standard to be able to search any further, and you'd have to get search warrants, and when simple possession is deemed unconstitutional, then you lose that power to get those search warrants.
With the ordinance, would you be able to search the car? Because we know
In
that
my
this
opinion,
is,
yes.
because this is a thoroughway for drug trafficking.
That's correct.
And
You
with
are a
grand-
pipeline in this county.
With grandkids, I want to make sure that we do everything we can to combat that. So I want you to have that ability, because they could be a mule and be packing these drugs to all over our state.
Good, yes, it's a possibility, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I have a question. That's not related to that, but are the officers, is their personal assets at risk for basically being charged for negligence of duty? Or I heard that some of the officers were saying that they were told to move their assets into a trust because there's no protection.
Yeah, what you're talking about is qualified immunity.
Yes.
And depending on which way the state goes, then yes, officers will, they're gonna make decisions what they're gonna do, if they're gonna stay in police work or not stay in police work, number one. Or for some of us that are lucky enough, you go, well, is it time to retire and let somebody else take on those risks? Because yes, when you act negligently as a law enforcement officer, I jump over here and pound the dog snot out of you.
Good luck.
I'm personally liable to that. The county's not liable for that. That negligence is on me. But what they're trying to do now with qualified immunity is say that you are personally liable even if you're acting within your scope and authority. So it's just an attack on the law enforcement system, in my opinion. So yes, officers are scrambling. That's why, in part, why you're seeing a lot of retirements right now that are taking place, because the guys are going, look, I have too much to risk to continue being a police officer in this community, and that's why they're retiring and finding other things to do.
Well, I think the community needs to know that if it's a judgment call, they may say, well, you know what, I'm not going to engage because it's not worth the risk. And that therefore it's putting the public safety at risk.
Yeah, it will be problematic if they take away qualified immunity.
Thank you.
And it's just gonna cause more safety concerns for the community in general.
Is there anything we can do at the county level?
Yeah, you push state legislators and senators that are trying to take qualified immunity away and say, not in my community. That's what you can do at a county level, or as a citizen, is to say, yeah, we're not going to do that. Look, law enforcement in Eastern Washington, we actually really do enjoy very good support from our community and the members in it and those type of things, and don't have a lot of those pushbacks such as Seattle and Portland, the King County areas and stuff. We really are really supportive, but what I think is happening is that our community is not aware of the attacks that are taking place on law enforcement and public safety at a legislative level of the state. And I think that we've been kind of lulled to sleep, and we're going to be surprised with some of the stuff that's coming out. I'll give you another example. The state's trying to put together a state police agency that's going to come in and investigate officer-involved shootings. Okay? Not the police investigate the officer-involved shootings, or the sheriff investigate a shooting that occurs with my deputies in the county. A police agency, a state police agency is going to come into it with an overall goal to turn that over to have citizens do the investigation and submit them to the Attorney General. So how do you think that's going to work if you're a cop on the street going, well, I think I'll skip that call. I'm not going to, shoot anybody. It's just going to create another set of scenarios. It's not this whole defunding the police umbrella or tactics things that are taking place in our legislators. It is not healthy for what's going to happen to communities when they do that. And you're already seeing places like Seattle backtracking with it going, no, we need to hire more cops. We need to refund them. And we have to be leery of not getting there in the first place while people are trying to push their own personal agenda. 99.9% of your cops, Mr. Mullen, are good, law-abiding men and women that are just trying to do their job, and they're not out to harm anybody.
Right, I would agree with that.
And it's a shame that we have a society that's now attacking police because of other people's deeds. So thank you. Please consider the ordinance if we could get it to that point.
And so far, there's only been one county that's passed that, Grant?
I don't know how many
There's-
passed it, but there's a number discussing
There's
it.
a number of counties that are passing it and bringing it up to resolution.
A local around
Grant
here?
County one, from my understanding, Denton County has done it.
Okay.
I could be wrong with that. And then there's a lot of municipalities, like City of Pasco and stuff that are exploring it. Some of them that have passed it, Marysville, I know has passed the gross misdemeanor ordinance for possession of controlled substances. So it's not that it can't be done, it's
The will to do it.
it's the will to do it
Yep.
and to create an ordinance that's enforceable.
All right. I'm in favor of looking into this
We'll draft
ASAP.
a proposal and bring it
Yep.
before the board.
Excellent. Okay, with that, we're down to the office business vouchers. I believe we have 2 today.
Yes. Fund expenditures. Move for approval, move for approval of fund expenditures in the amount of $1,297,911.55. As presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the auditor's office and the county administrator.
Second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Move for approval of salary clearing payroll and emergency management payroll in the amount of $981,322.82 as presented, and note that it has been reviewed and signed by 2 representatives of the auditor's office.
Second.
And a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so now we're down to the consent agenda. Please note that there is only 10 items on the consent agenda, not 11.
Chairman, I'd request we pull item 2 for separate consideration. I bring it up now to make the motion easier.
Second that.
No, you got to make the motion on the item 1, 3 through 10. We'll exclude 2 at this time.
Make a motion that we approve items 1 through 10 with the exclusion of number 2.
Separate consideration.
Separate consideration.
For a second.
Second.
I would like discussion on number 9. The Franklin County electronic signature policy. I just want to make sure that the consent of the signer is always asked before it is used.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that's my only discussion. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. We'll move now to item number 2 for separate consideration.
Item number 2 is the proposal to convert a vacant court reporter position to an executive assistant. And a few concerns. One is that our county clerk, who is traveling today and isn't available to be here in person, probably on an airplane as we speak, has expressed some concerns about the fact that in his judgment, this puts a process in place where court reporters aren't always in the courtroom taking the record, and that can put a burden on the clerk's office in our county to run an electronic FTR system, and I don't know what that acronym stands for. I've just read it a few times, to record the proceedings as I understand is legally required. And so the concern is that I think this needs more discussion when one of our independent elected officials comes forward and says, this shifts work to my office. Then we should have a full understanding of that before we approve it. And then the second concern is that in the read ahead, the budgetary impact here is cited as zero. And in fact, if you have an approved position for one office and you decide you don't need that, that doesn't automatically mean that the budget authority should carry over somewhere else. Each position ought to be evaluated on its own merits as to the degree to which it's needed. Otherwise, between the positions in the assessor's office and the county administrator's office, we might say, gosh, we don't need that position in the assessor's office after all, and therefore the one in the deputy's office is automatically or should automatically be approved. I just think these positions have to be looked at individually, and that it's an unintentional but nevertheless a bit of a mislead to say that the budget impact is zero. So for those two reasons, I think we ought to get more understanding before approving it. I'm not taking a position entirely against it, but again, we have independent elected officials who we point to as the experts in their respective areas, and I think as a board, when one of our independent electeds says, hey, this causes a real problem for me, one, they should come before the board and educate us on what that is so that we can weigh that in. And in this case, when they're physically unable to be here, they should either send a surrogate or we should schedule it at a time when they can come in.
Keith?
If I may, yes,
Yes.
thank you. I don't disagree with Commissioner Peck that the principal folks who are impacted by this could be invited to a board meeting to discuss it. Just in terms of some background information, this was a request of the Administrative Office of the Courts, Tiffany Deaton. She's been working with this position vacant for some time. And so in budget discussions that took place last fall, Benton County and Franklin County were not desirous to fill that additional court reporter position, but yet understood the need for the administrator's office over there to have an additional clerical position in their office. So she made the request to use that vacant court reporter position that had not been funded or approved by either Benton or Franklin County to transfer that position into a different one for her office. So I believe she was acting in good faith and trying to do the best that she could under the circumstances of the budget limitations. However, Mr. Killian did state late last week a concern about the lack of hiring of court reporters, and that basically the essence of his note was that if they don't need court reporters, then they should get rid of all of the court reporters. But I think it was clear that the FTR system that we use in Franklin County and the JAVS system that Benton County uses sometimes have technical problems, and they need to be able to assign a court reporter into the courtroom on the fly because they don't want to delay the judges or the proceedings of the court by not having either a digital means or a person to record the events of what transpires in the courtroom. So I certainly understand that if you would like to have Mr.
Excuse me,
Killian
could I get just a little clarification there? Because
Certainly.
it may change my view here. I was not aware that both counties had evaluated this during the budget process. Did I understand that correctly? And was part of that discussion to approve this transfer from a court reporter to an executive assistant? Was that approved and incorporated in the budget?
Yes.
Okay, then, Mr. Chairman, I'll just rescind my concern. It had due hearing. I didn't recall that being done. And in my conversations with Mr. Killian, that was not acknowledged either. But if we had a board that went through the budget process and approved and made a decision that this is how this position should be handled, then we should honor that. Not unlike our commitments in our own budget process last year to hire someone in the assessor's office and the county administrator's office. So with that, I'll withdraw and happy to make a motion to reincorporate item 2 in the consent agenda as originally presented.
Or a second?
I'll second that.
Second discussion. Keith, is this going to create more work for our clerk?
No, it should not. I think part of it was the,
Why was this concern for that there would be create more work then? I hadn't heard this.
yeah,
Hadn't
well,
talked to
there
him.
have been times where a clerk is not, court reporter is not available, and he has to rely on his court staff to fill in. So in that situation, yeah, there would be an additional burden on his staff. But I think that was a rhetorical argument to say we need to make sure there are court reporters available.
Gotcha. Okay.
I don't know if you need to hear from her, but Tiffany Deaton is now on the phone if you want to ask her any particular questions.
I
about
think
this.
that since she's on the phone, yes, if there's any questions for her.
Okay, we'll hear from Tiffany. Good morning, Tiffany.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
We were just discussing the item on the consent agenda regarding the position in your office. The board had some questions, but perhaps you could save them some time by just giving a brief overview of the process that we went to with Benton County to get this in the budget for this year.
Yes, absolutely. So the position I am converting has been in our budget for years and years. The position became vacant in 2016, and since then, even though the job was posted, we haven't been able to fill it. I have been needing a staff person, and so when we were looking at the budget process last fall for 2019 or 2020, 2021, it appeared that it would be most beneficial for me to convert that position since I've been unable to fill it. Hold on, I'm gonna turn my computer down. It's conflicting. Can you hear that?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
There is some feedback in the background.
Hopefully that'll help.
Yes, that's
So when, and over the past 2.5 years that we haven't had that 6 court reporter position filled, we have still been able to cover all of our court trials and hearings and dockets that we typically cover with a court reporter. So there was no impact to the way we conduct business, whether we're using FTR versus court reporter, since we've not had that 6-person position. So we've been able to manage everything with the 5 we have. So there would be no impacts to convert the position. And there's been no impacts to either clerks from Benton or Franklin that we haven't had that 6th position filled. So, and it was in an effort to consult, with financial issues that we've been having, instead of asking for another FTE to utilize a vacant position.
Okay.
And this is Commissioner Peck. If you would just confirm that Benton County approved in your 2021 budget this reallocation of funds to the administrator position in lieu of the court reporter position?
Yes, they had it on their agenda as a meeting last week, and they approved me converting the position. We were just coming to you guys now for your support and consent as well.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tiffany.
You're welcome.
So that last statement indicates that that approval was not done in the budget process, but nevertheless, I'm willing to proceed.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Hey, Keith, we're down to administration office business.
So, Mr. Chairman, I believe that vote was on my motion to reinstate item 2 into the
Yes.
consent, and I think we still need to vote on the full consent to make it legal, do we not?
No, we voted for it. We voted for 1 and 3 through 10. We passed that. And I asked a question on that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Keith, we're down to administration.
Yes, thank you. First item is to have a discussion on the vacant appraiser position. I see our appraiser is in the meeting room this morning. I suppose he would like to address the board to get clarity on board's intent with respect to that position.
Actually, Commissioners, I just wanted to make myself available if you had any questions on that. I know we discussed it briefly last week. And I had submitted to you how much of a need there is for filling that appraiser position in the office. And so I'm kind of representing myself in case you have any questions and to ask for you to reconsider opening that up and letting us start posting for that position. It will take some time to find the right person and be able to get that filled.
Commissioners, any questions?
I have a couple. In your in your previous discussion with us last week, you were recounting your research on purchasing vehicles, and it sounded like pretty thorough research. You even looked at the possibility of leases, which I think I had suggested to one of your staff, and good to see that that got followed up on. But after the meeting, I started trying to recall, you were highlighting the cost differential between purchasing a vehicle and going through our county ER&R. And I may be incorrect here, and maybe you could enlighten me. Based on the numbers and what I heard you say, it sounded like there was a $200,000 difference over the life of the vehicle. And what I didn't see was a calculation for the fact that while you pay a significant fee to ER&R, at the end of the life cycle of the vehicle, you have a new replacement vehicle that's already been paid for. And under the process of purchasing the vehicle and those calculations at the end of the life of the vehicle, you've got a salvage value vehicle and not much more. So did you calculate into your numbers the fact that with ER&R at the end, you have a replacement vehicle already paid for?
We did, and that would only be if we could keep like an in-house ER&R. So I believe my numbers were around $458 a month plus the purchase of the vehicle if we handle it in-house. If we go with ER&R through Public Works and that, it was $600 and some per month plus the purchase of the vehicles for the ER&R that way. Both of those included maintenance, fuel estimations, and so forth. So it actually amounts to about $20,000 per vehicle savings, us doing it in-house ourselves per vehicle.
And those numbers included a replacement vehicle at the end of the life of that vehicle?
Correct, they did.
$458 a month, you said?
Correct. Now that's under current, and that's estimating, which again, Public Works ER&R has to estimate, and they relook at that every year. So there's a potential that next year that payment could be more than the 600 and some. We're looking at estimating at the increased value or cost of an automobile 8 or 10 years from now versus what they cost right now. Yeah. And those are reevaluated every year. But based on the current evaluation, it would be not quite $200 or $20,000 of the life of the vehicle, the 10 years, or not quite $200 a month savings in-house.
And if I recall, you went and visited with the Ford folks and asked what they could do in comparison to the state contract?
Correct, and they actually beat the state contract price.
Okay. And so we approved the vehicle, and now we're looking at this one staff position.
The current one that was on hold, correct. And we used those funds that you approved, Commissioners, up through the end of April.
Sure.
For that position.
I recall
we wouldn't
that.
be filling it before the 1st of May anyway.
Yeah.
You know, getting it and interviewing and finding the right person.
Yeah. Well, as I've said numerous times, I think the assessor's office has been wonderfully efficient over the years and very responsible. And I have supported their requests for staffing in the past, and I don't feel any differently now. The only bit of concern I'm having is kind of looking at equity among departments and, you know, providing new vehicles and new staff for one department when we've got others that are struggling. But I still support the assessor's need. Thank you.
It's not just one vehicle, it's 2 vehicles, correct?
Correct.
Yes,
Two
2 vehicles. And so that money's used up to the end of April, and you're not planning on hiring until after April.
Correct.
Okay.
Part of those funds were from our payroll. Part of it was from a contingency fund.
Right.
For the 2 vehicles. Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
How soon would you, if it's approved, would you post the job opening?
You say, how soon would I post?
Yes.
As quick as I could get HR to probably do the posting, and we'd be making some phone calls and doing some in-person searches immediately.
I make the motion that we open up the assessor's position.
Give me just a moment, if you will. I'm checking a reference here. Okay. Take the motion as for approval of proceeding with the hiring in the assessor's office, and I'll second.
Been a motion and a second. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Motion passes. Keith?
Very good. Thank you. Next item of business is request of the board to draft a letter to the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, often referred to as the acronym of SSEC. Their manager, looks like her name is Sonia Bumpus. Drafted that letter. I sent that to you by email. I haven't heard any additional edits or changes to that letter, so I'm just kind of have it here before you for your consideration to sign today.
I know that Commissioner Mullen has recused himself, so I've read it, well written. The only thing not mentioned that would have been nice, a little more heavily, would have been the fly area for the birds and the amount of birds that it would destroy. But otherwise, I think it's a good letter. I'm in agreement to sign it. Commissioner Peck, have you been able to read it?
So, Mr. Johnson, have you had opportunity to consult with Benton County? I know they've had taken this up at a couple of different discussions in their meetings. Have they taken a position on this development yet, formal?
I'm not sure how formal it is. My understanding is they have supported the writing of the letter and has either signed it or are in the process of doing so. So I think it's fair to say that they agree with the position of being opposed to this. The nature of their formality of approval, I would have to go back and verify.
Yeah, I'm not concerned about the nature of the formalities. I'm just whether or not they've taken an official position as opposed to one or more commissioners expressing a personal opinion. I bring it up because you know, if we had a major issue pending in our county, it would probably be my preference that an adjoining county didn't weigh in and take a position for or against without the courtesy of consulting with them and finding out, you know, does that in any way run afoul of their process. So it's more a professional courtesy than anything. I'm not in support of the project. I think in a previous meeting I gave enough reasons and explanations as to why. My only question is whether or not we've made the appropriate inquiry at Benton County to respect their wishes. So I'm willing to second and support with the understanding that county administrator will touch base with Benton County just to make sure that they don't have any opposition to us doing that. I'm quite sure they won't. I just think it's a necessary professional courtesy.
That's a good point. I'm glad to do that. I think that makes sense.
Do we need a motion on this or just a consent?
No,
Just
yeah,
a consent.
Consensus is fine.
And we could probably sign it with the
Yeah, I'll
thought
verify
process
with-
that it follows Benton County's lead. That we only send it in if they, which I've heard that they're all three in favor of sending in their letter. But we'll find out.
I concur.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that, Keith, any other business?
I do have a couple more items. I received an invitation on Friday on behalf of the county to participate in a State of the County's virtual luncheon put on by the Tri-City Regional Chamber of Commerce. The format is with both Benton and Franklin County, the county administrator taking a few minutes to give some overview of current events going on in the county and kind of status of the county, and then each of the commissioners being present to be open and available for a Q&A session from the luncheon membership. It's a 1-hour luncheon that they do, I think monthly, at least on a regular basis. And
What's the date?
April 28th. That's a Wednesday at noon. So my question is twofold. One, is this something that you wish to participate in or have me participate in or not? And then if so, are you available at that time? Be a virtual meeting, it would not be an in-person meeting.
So I'm happy to have you do that. I think it's a great thing to do. I'm reminded that the Open Public Meetings Act in Washington says that if a quorum of board members discusses matters, that is a quote unquote action, and actions outside of an advertised open public meeting are unlawful. So for us to participate as a board would be illegal unless we were to make that a meeting of the Board of Commissioners, which to me seems maybe a little excessive. I'm not opposed to having a commissioner go and
we could certainly
represent, but if we're going to all be there, then it has to be made a meeting, and that seems a little excessive.
That's the first thing I pointed out to her, was make sure that we were in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. If we need to notice a special meeting of the board for that purpose, we can provide that.
Do we know
notice.
what Benton County is doing?
I don't. I don't know if they've even agreed to participate in this yet. I just, like I said, I got this Friday. And
I see that that's a Wednesday, and I know that Commissioner Mullen represents us for the Pasco Chamber of Commerce, correct?
I do.
And so I would be in favor of Commissioner Mullen representing Franklin County, if you'd be willing to do it.
I'd be willing to support that.
Yes.
this is the Tri-Cities Chamber, which is
Oh,
a
Tri-Cities
slightly
Chamber.
different organization, but
I think
I'm
you
set.
represent us there as well, don't you?
I believe so.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's great. It'd be good opportunity for people to get to see who you are.
All right, I'll communicate that back to them. Let's see. I have one request for an executive session under RCW 42.30.110, paragraph 1I, to discuss with legal counsel matters relating to agency enforcement actions, litigation, or potential litigation. Probably up to 30 minutes. Would request that myself, the board, Carly, from HR, Jen Johnson, and Sean Sant from the prosecutor's office be invited to participate.
Chairman, I'd request a 5-minute recess before we go into what could be a lengthy executive session.
Okay,
And after we come out of that executive session, I would anticipate an action by the board.
okay. So with that, there is one last segment of public comment. Do we have anybody on the phone? Anybody in the audience that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, I would go for the 5-minute recess and then we will come back. Tell me when. Okay, we're coming out of the recess of 5 minutes. Back to regular meeting, and now we'll head into executive session under RCW. Help me out here, Keith.
Certainly. 42.30.110, paragraph 1, subparagraph I, to discuss with legal counsel litigation or potential litigation.
Okay, so at this time, we'll go into executive session. I'll go close it. Okay, we're coming out of executive session with no decisions being made today. And therefore, we will ask, is there any further business for the good of the board?
Did we hear anything back from the attorney on the redistricting? I thought that was going to be discussed today.
I don't know that we've had anything new. Have we, Sean?
I haven't seen anything. But
Okay, with,
At least that was my understanding, that we were going to get a response from him as far as what our options were as far as forming a redistricting committee. As the time is getting shorter each week, we need to do something.
I'll let him know that we can do that for next week and plan probably a half hour to an hour time frame for executive session.
All right, thank you.
yes.
We're still looking at probably August being the earliest that we would have
Census.
census information. And I think that's being optimistic, but we can be prepared for that.
Yeah, I think the state has extended the redistricting window for state-controlled districts out till the end of the year, at least.
All right.
That doesn't really change our situation any, but it's interesting information.
Which doesn't mean we can't still, if we come to an agreement, to put together a committee that is ready to go when that census comes out and we have a committee established. And that's what I'd like to see done, is if we can get a committee put together that is ready to move on maps when they get the certified census numbers. Okay, with that.
I have one other
Go ahead.
question coming up. Where are we at on the guard shack outside? Have they hired new people to replace the contract we had with security out there?
The corrections division of the sheriff's office is performing the security functions out there. They have additional positions in the budget starting in July to hire on top of their regular staffing, but they also have, I think, 3 openings in the corrections division already.
If they haven't filled those positions, or after looking at this, I mean, it looks to me like it's considerably more expensive to put our own people out there.
It is.
I mean, like, it's like $200 a day.
It is more costly, but where they're performing more functions. And I mean, the added level of security that we didn't have before. It is costing us more doing it this way.
When you say it's adding a level of security with the sheriff located in the same premises, how would we justify that statement?
Well, they are armed. There's a word for it. I want to say certified, but that's not the right word.
Commission.
Commissioned. Thank you, Carly. These are commissioned law enforcement officers that can respond directly rather than have to call 911 or call someone else in the event of an emergency. In other words, if with the contractors, if they had a bomb threat or somebody came in with a firearm trying to get through, they would have had to call for backup or sheriff's deputies or someone to come assist them. Now, these guys can address those threats directly. We haven't had a lot, but we have had a couple of breaches in the security shack in the last couple of years. Where not a firearm or a bomb related event, but a protester that became threatening, and it was he was arrested and trespassed from the premises, so he's not able to come back. So steps were taken, and it wasn't an overly serious event, but it led us to the realization that we have an exposure there that the sheriff wanted to close up.
The contracting committee, how did they perform under that situation?
The individual was already inside the premises of the contracting
So they already
group.
came through security.
Had already, yeah.
So what's that? I guess my question would be is how would that have changed with different personnel in the guard shack?
Well, just having our people, our employees that are commissioned readily available for any threats in the courthouse.
So they would have to leave the guard shack. Or lock it down.
They could close the guard shack to respond. Some of these are questions that you might want to address directly with Sheriff Raymond.
Sure.
So would you like to see this on the agenda next week?
I would like
discuss with
to
the
see,
sheriff?
I would like to see it on the agenda next week, yes.
Is there any other business for the good of the board? Yes.
I want to let people know that on the 6th, I know it's not next week, but on the 6th, we're having a night meeting.
Yes, on April 6th, we are scheduled for a 7 o'clock night meeting here in the chamber. And on April 28th, we are scheduled for the first public forum on a presentation for property tax assessment, complying with the state property tax assessment for our county residents. That'll be held up north at a location that you need to check with the assessor's office. Trying to get all of our patrons up north in compliance so that they won't get fined with the state, who is coming out to do twice as many audits in this year because they weren't able to do them last year.
Is that an assessor's office action?
Assessor's office, excuse me? Is it an assessor's office what?
Action
Action.
program?
Yes, a presentation, yes.
Not a board of commissioners?
No, not a board of commissioners. It's a assessor's office, and I have asked to also attend to and help recruit people to get there so that we get people in compliance and we don't get our constituents fined by the state. To get everybody in compliance.
Sounds like a great initiative. Just a reminder that if 2 or more commissioners show up, because I may attend as well, it sounds interesting. We just need to be mindful of our duty to not engage, participate, stay separate.
Okay. Any other announcements or business? Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned. Hand that to Commissioner Peck so he can sign that. We can send it to Benton County if they decide to get their letter in.